National Geographic Kids, Ancient Egypt. Peek into the past. It took Howard Carter years of searching before he found Tutankhamun's tomb. On November 26, 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter stood in front of a sealed door. It had been closed for 3,000 years. His hands shaking, Carter chipped a hole in the door and peered inside. "Can you see anything?" asked a member of his team. "Yes," said Carter. "Wonderful things." Carter had found the tomb of the King Tutankhamun, Tutankhamun. It sparkled with treasures. The discovery gave people a glimpse of one of the greatest civilizations in history, ancient Egypt. Tomb talk. Archaeologist, a person who studies objects like old tools, pottery, and tombs to learn about human history. Civilization, the culture and way of life of a group of people. A replica of the tomb that Carter and his team found. Gift of the Nile. The Nile is one of the longest rivers in the world. Egypt is a hot, dry desert. But the Nile River runs right through it. The Nile used to flood every year. The floodwater left behind thick soil called silt. The silt was good for growing crops. People settled along the Nile more than 7,500 years ago. To keep track of when they should plant crops, they made a calendar based on the Nile's yearly flood. It had a year of 365 days divided into 12 months. We still use this calendar today. The banks of the Nile River are green with plants and trees. Just beyond it, the desert land is dry and sandy. Egyptian sailboats got extra power from rowers. Long poles were used to steer the boats. Egyptians used the Nile like a highway through their land. They built boats and steered them up and down the river. The boats carried things to trade with other countries. Ancient Egypt grew into a powerful civilization. It was one of the most powerful in the history of the world. It lasted for nearly 3,000 years, from 3150 BC to 30 BC. Date details. The year AD 1 is the first year in the calendar we use today. The time of ancient Egypt was before that. Historians decided to count the time before the year AD 1 by counting backward from that year. They called those years BC. For example, King Tutankhamun was born in 1341 BC. He became king in 1332 BC, when he was 9 years old. It's good to be king. The rulers of ancient Egypt were called pharaohs. People believed the pharaoh was a god on earth. The pharaoh had all of the power. He or she made the laws. The pharaoh owned the land and everything in it. Artists carved and painted pharaohs onto statues and buildings. They always made the pharaoh appear young and fit no matter how he or she looked in real life. This stone carving shows a pharaoh with a god. Ramses II was one of ancient Egypt's most important pharaohs. He ruled for 65 years and built more monuments than any king before him. Tutankhamun only ruled for 10 years. But he's famous because he was buried with more than 5,000 treasures like thrones, jewelry, a gold coffin, and a chariot. In Tutankhamun's tomb, a throne and a chariot, were discovered. Queen of the Nile. Most pharaohs were men, but not all. For a long time, experts didn't know the pharaoh Hatshepsut was a woman. That's because she ordered statues and paintings to show her as a man with a beard and big muscles. A statue of Hatshepsut. Tomb talk. Chariot, a two-wheeled vehicle pulled by horses. Mighty monuments. Some pharaohs ordered huge structure called pyramids to be built. The pyramids honored the pharaohs. One was the Great Pyramid of Khufu, Khufu, at Giza. It was the tallest structure in the world for more than 3,800 years. It was 481 feet tall and took 20 years to build. The Egyptians created the Great Sphinx, Sphinx, to guard the pyramids. This statue is as tall as the White House. Its paws are bigger than city buses. Tomb talk. Sphinx, a made-up creature with a lion's body and a human head. Egyptians carved Sphinx statues to guard important areas. In this painting, thousands of workers build Pharaoh Khufu's pyramid at Giza. The workers who built the pyramids did not have machines. Experts think they cut stone from quarries into huge blocks. They dragged the blocks to boats and floated them down the Nile. Then, they hauled the blocks up ramps into place on the pyramid. Lost City. In 1999, an ancient town near the pyramids was discovered. Long ago, this town was home to workers who built the pyramids. The area was bigger than 10 football fields. People carefully dig up the ancient town. Tomb talk. Quarries, areas where rocks are cut from the ground for building projects. Life after death. The pyramids weren't just buildings. They were tombs. A pharaoh was buried in each of the large pyramids. Smaller pyramids nearby held the bodies of family members. Animals in the afterlife. Not all mummies were human. Egyptians sometimes made mummies of animals like this cat. Mummies of dogs, hawks, and even crocodiles have been discovered, too. Tomb talk. Mummy, the body of a human or animal that has been dried and wrapped before burial. Egyptians believed in a life after death. They wanted to make sure their dead relatives would have everything they might need in the afterlife. So they stocked their tombs with things like food, clothes, furniture, and jewelry. Experts think that the first mummies were made by accident. Egyptians buried their dead in the desert. The hot, dry sand killed bacteria that caused the body to break down. So instead of rotting, the bodies dried out. This Egyptian mummy now lies in the National Archaeological Museum in Madrid, Spain. The Egyptians believed that if a person's body was preserved, his or her soul would live forever. They studied these natural mummies. They learned how to make bodies last for centuries. This process is called mummification, mummification. Weird but true. Not everyone was mummified. The process was so expensive that only the wealthy could afford it. Tomb talk. Preserved, protected from breaking down or rotting.